going to start with getting set up right and what that means and how it will affect going forward in the software when you have it set up right, and how that will help you along the way. And we're going to cover ledger setup, your center setup, division setup, and vendor setup. These are the basics of the accounting program setup portions. And we'll discuss how they all interact with the software and how they interact with reporting and why they're important and how to set them up. So ledger accounts are the first part, and these would be all your chart of accounts. So we're talking like your income, expense, asset, liability, equity accounts. These are your ledger accounts, and they are the backbone of your accounting system. They are fully customizable, and what that means is we do have some ones you can start with. We have some basic ledger accounts that if you start our program, we can set you up with. If you came from an existing accounting software, we can usually use that same numbering system, or at least talk to you about your numbering system, and we might adjust it or edit some of them and give you some suggestions. But if you're comfortable and when you're keying in a lot of data entry, you remember some of the numbers you use when we talk about ledger accounts. So if you have and you're used to certain numbering systems, we can definitely accommodate those. So like the numbers and description, like I said, are completely up to your discretion. I think you have 6 characters for a ledger account that you can use. They can be alpha or numeric. If you do use alpha characters, they are case sensitive. So if you put in a capital, you have to use a capital when you're searching for it. But you really want to kind of think about and take your time on your numbering systems to best fit your needs when you're running reports. When we get to reports, you'll see, if you're not familiar with it already, you have a field on most reports asks you what ledger accounts you want to run for. But it's limited in how many you pick, so you couldn't pick like 50 separate ledger accounts. You'd have to do a ranges. So when you're thinking about your ledger accounts, you want to group similar type ledger accounts together. So like all your crop sales will be together, all your livestock sale ledger accounts will be together, all your crop input ledger accounts you might have together, and same with livestock. Something you might have to group later for report purposes, you would want to group together. You also might want to consider using the more commonly used accounts higher in that section. So if you have income accounts, like your crop enterprise, you put your crop sales accounts towards the top. You might put some of your like reimbursed income or rental income down further to the bottom of the list of income accounts, just because you won't use them as frequently. So we will go ahead and go to the setup for ledger accounts and kind of go through a little bit more on what I mean on that. Okay, so to set up a ledger account, in our system you always have all the options here under setup and accounting for your setup. But remember also that anytime you're putting in an entry, you always have the option to add a ledger account on the fly. So if you don't have a ledger account you need when you're doing an entry, a check deposit, payable, receivable, or journal entry, you can always add a ledger account on the input screen, so you don't want to come out to this setup screen. So it does happen, you're doing something different, or you got a new vendor and you might want to label something differently. You can always add that in as you go. So the ledger accounts that you see here right now would be what would come up if you chose the basic ledger account setup that FBS has that you can choose to start with, which is old, because they started this when there was only allowed 3 digits. And this is not I wouldn't recommend this numbering system here because it's only uses 3 digits. I fully encourage you to use all 6 digits that you can use in a ledger account numbering system, just because it allows you to more room to expand your chart of accounts as you grow or as you have more needs for organizing these ledger accounts. So you see these are all numeric, like 301, 302, 303. There's no room to put anything in between there if we needed to add something in that section. I recommend, like I said, 6 digits. I also recommend leaving at least 10 spaces between each numbering. So I maybe go 3,001, 3,011, 3,021, so on and so forth, to leave a lot of room in my numbering. And I don't know if further down this one if I have anything different or not. I don't.
So Sarah, I get the gap in case you need to fill more things in there.
Mm-hmm.
But does that mean that you can't move numbers, tweak numbers, because it messes everything up later? Is that what you're insinuating?
I'm not insinuating that. No, but that is a very good question. In case anybody didn't know that, you can always change this too. It's not set in stone. So if something it's not working out where it is in your chart of accounts, you always have the opportunity to change the number that you have assigned to it. You'll see this far column says INT ID. I can't really see it real clearly there, but that is our internal ID. And that you cannot change, but that saves the historical data with it. So if I was gonna come up here and change that, I'm saying, okay, 301 is not one, I wanna go to 3,000 for my income account. Actually, I'll get to my digits here. I can do that. And it's gonna throw it down the bottom of my list because it's a bigger number. But you'll notice here, it still has a 301 internal ID to keep historical data intact. So that I can reuse the number 301 now if I needed to. So that's another way. If you have ledger accounts you're not using, you can renumber them to put them down towards the bottom of the list when you make them active or
And then what if
inactive.
you put something else up there that needs to be 301, then what happens?
Then that very good question. So I can re-add a number 301. It puts a Z behind, usually puts
Sorry if everyone knows.
No, absolutely, this is what you're supposed to be doing. It adds a Z usually behind the system, it puts an internal ID of a Z behind it so that it's a new internal ID, so it's its new own history and own ledger
And
account.
all that information from 301 in the past will follow 3001.
Yep, it is all there, so you
I
don't.
am running into the problems where I don't have enough room.
Yeah, you do, and that's why we've expanded that numbering. Yep.
I'm here for you.
So as far as what numbers you start with in your income section or your expense section, it's all up to you. If you've been on the system a while, you'll see most people's income accounts start with a 3 and a 4. Expenses are the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9s. And then you have your assets that start around the 1,000s, and then liabilities start 2,000s, and your equities usually start or continuation of the 2s. But we'll get onto what all that means in a minute. So you have complete discretion over the numbering and the description of your ledger accounts. So descriptions, you are limited on how many characters you can have there as well. I think it's around 25 or 26. So you kind of have to make abbreviations, but you need to be able to tell what the ledger account's being used for in your description. And the more descriptive you can be in that small amount of characters, the better for anybody who's coming in to fill in for you, or anybody who is trying to read a report that you're putting out. You want those pretty descriptive, even though you're kind of limited there on how much you can have in that description field. We'll talk about this setup screen a little bit here. So the first one is active ledger account. If you have a check mark there, it's an active ledger account. That means you can put new entries to it. If I was to uncheck this box, I could still run reports on this ledger account and still pull in any data that was in that ledger account. I just couldn't put any new data to that ledger account, 302. The next field is our classes, our 5 basic classes. Your numbering and description we already kind of talked about. And then we get to this type. And this type, I'm going to kind of refer back to my PowerPoint. That's really hard to see. This is also in the help file within FBS. And it might be easier for me to pull up there too even. And if you don't know how to pull up the help file, it is utilities, help topics, and then I'm going to go to setup here.
Am I able to pull any of this up on my computer? Is there a demo thing on the FBS site or not?
There is not. We can get you a demo, but there's not one on it that you can quickly download very easily anyway. Let's see if I can get you bigger on this screen so maybe we can see it a little better. So when we talk about types, this is basically the columns that are going to show up on your input screen for you to utilize. A standard one, you always have a description column and a quantity column. So on entry screens, what this means is down here, when you're doing adding a check or a deposit or anything like that, you get past the basic accounting center division and dollar amount. That's standard on every single ledger account type. You have to have these first 4 columns, or actually it's the first 5 columns through description. And then anything after that is dependent on what kind of type you set this ledger account up as. So this one just has, I happen to pick an operating loan interest account. So I have my center division, dollar amount, a description, and then it's gonna click over to quantity only. So I only have an option of putting a quantity in. That's a standard account. If it was a money borrowed account, like a liability account for a loan or an accounts payable, you would also have a column that comes up and asks what the due date was, what the pay date was, and what the interest rate was. These are all 3 columns that are for reporting purposes only. They don't calculate your interest rate for you. They do not automatically create an entry on that due date, but you can record what, so the due date would be the loan maturation date, and the pay date is what date of that month that the loan is due, and then your interest rate. If you had a livestock sales or purchase account, it would ask you for a quantity and weight. If it was a capital purchase for livestock, it would ask additionally, what is the life, your depreciation life on the animal? Is it 5 years, 7 years, whatever you're going to depreciate out as. A capital purchase such as equipment, it will ask an additional column, is it new, yes or no, and what is your depreciation life on it? Hired labor, of course, has all your labor, like gross wages, federal, FICA, state, Medicare, and other. Crop purchases will ask additional moisture, wet and dry quantity. And when you have these additional columns, doesn't mean you absolutely have to fill them in. You can leave them blank, but it gives you the option to fill those in if you want to record that data.
And Sarah, now if I were to utilize those other extra things, what am I trying to say? Anyway, so let's say I want to put in there for my farms, for example, and I put a specific farm in an extra column. Can I just call for that extra column and it can just pull up information in that extra column? Or as far as pulling reports, can you pull reports out of any of those columns, or it comes up as a whole graph like that? You
can pull up anything based on the description column on a user-defined reports. There isn't any reports that pulls up anything based on any of the other columns. They're all reportable. Like in a crop sales report or a purchase report, you'll be able to see your quantity, moisture, and quantity. On an animal purchase or sales report, you'll be able to see the weight and the quantity. But there isn't a report where you could say pull up all my purchases of one animal or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Okay.
A heading account is so if you want to divide your income statement or balance sheet up more and have different subsections, you'd add more headings in your ledger account setup. So some people put crop sales, livestock sales, crop inputs, livestock inputs, personal expenses, G&A expenses as headings, and then you have more breakdown on your balance sheet and income statement with subtotals. Bank accounts are type M's. That means any ledger account that has a type M will come up on a check or a deposit. On the drop-down list is an option to pull up as a bank account. And then we have a net income account, which you will never post to, but the system automatically rolls your net income, retain your earnings from 1 year over net income for the next year when you have a net income account set up. So we're going to come over here to like an entry, and so corn sales. It is set up as a ledger account of crop sales. So then when I pick that ledger account, let's put a dollar amount in here, it's going to pop up a little box for me, and it's going to let me put in, other than if it's a harvest, yes or no. You have that option, and if it was a harvest, it will ask you where did you store the crop at. This is a check, so it makes no sense for crop sales, but we're just going to go with it for this example. And it's going to ask you what field you harvested it at. If you didn't harvest it, I could have chose from the very top up here that it wasn't a harvest, it was strictly a sale. It would not ask me, it would ask me what bin I sold it from, but it wouldn't ask me what field it came from. So then it'll ask me what was my moisture when I sold it. what was my wet quantity, what was my dry quantity. You can also have in shrink tables, and it'll manually calculate your dry quantity based on your moisture and your wet quantity. And then it'll finish and go to the next line for your check. So then if I had like, let's see what I have down here. I'm not finding the one I want to do. Animal purchase. I don't have an animal purchase account in this data set. Okay. I'm just gonna make one really quick. Okay. So I pick my ledger account for animal sales. It's going to ask me how many head I sold and what was the weight, the total weight for those animals. And so the boxes will come up for that. Okay. So you can see it's the same entry, and I went from a crop to an animal sale. It just changes the box that pops up for you to relate back to the type of ledger account that you have set up. I'm sorry about the little table. Okay. So then we also, when we get past the type here, we also have what asked, do you want it on the income statement and balance sheet? 99% of the time it's yes. I don't know if I've ever set up a ledger account that I didn't want on my income statement and balance sheet, but I'm sure, obviously it's come up before, we wouldn't have that option. So maybe it would be for if you're tracking some personal expenses, but you didn't want them to show up on your farm's balance sheet or income statement, you maybe would pick a no there.
Well, like back fat, ledger accounts for like back fat.
Oh, that's true, yeah. Your carcass qualities that are ledger accounts.
Like that. Quantitative issues deal with production that you really don't need on your financial statement.
Yeah. And then we get down to these integration types. And integration types come into play if you have our crop module, our feeding module, or our breeding module. And integration type means it will affect an inventory somewhere in the system within those different modules. You will see a lot of times we'll refer to an integrated type account as a linked account. And we'll use those two terms back and forth. If you're talking to anybody from the office, a linked account means it's going to affect an inventory somewhere as well. So we have chemical purchase, seed purchase, fertilizer purchase. Those are your crop inputs. Obviously they go with crop audit. That means if you chose one of those as an integration type, you are going to be able to add, like if you purchase a chemical, it's either going to put it into inventory or be a buy and dispense and show up on the chemical inventory report. Seed, same way. Fertilizer, the same way. They're going to show up on one of those input inventory reports, and you're going to be able to affect an inventory for those inputs. Crop purchase and crop sale affect, the harvested grain or harvested hay, whatever commodity you might have. It's going to be affect those inventory reports as well. Fuel, same way. Animals, pretty self-explanatory again. Those work with the crop, the smart feeder and smart breeder. So you can purchase your sows and you can purchase your weaned pigs in, purchase your nursery pigs in, your animal purchase account. When you sell weaned pigs or you sell the fat animal, you'll use the animal sale account, and it will affect the inventories within those modules. The description file is the only one on here. It's called an integrated account. It's not going to affect an inventory. What that means is if you want to save your descriptions in a standard ledger account, you would type it as an integrated type in description file, and it will save your list of descriptions. To be more standardized in your descriptions, you can pick up from a pick list. So maybe you want to be able to, specify or save in there some descriptions about repairs and maintenance, or lubrication, oils for equipment, shop supplies, office supplies. There can be standardized descriptions that make it easier to report on those or use those within a user find report to pull up all your purchases of shop supplies and be able to go through those.
So that does not, and that's true, yes, so that just accumulates a lot of data entry. It accumulates a lot of entries that you could make.
Yeah.
But on these other actual, so if I was to pick, item purchase or like the L Smart Feed or something, do I have that option there too? It won't save all those descriptions. I just manually put descriptions in. Okay.
Usually on like any of the input purchases, like your feed ingredient, if you have one listed as an ingredient purchase,
Yeah.
or a chemical purchase, the description that's going to go in the description field is the name of that chemical. So when you pick a chemical off your pick list, it puts that chemical name in your description.
Okay.
If you pick the animal sales, animal purchase accounts, it's whatever you type in, the description saves there.
Okay. Yep.
But that doesn't go on your like a pick list
Right.
for your
That's
description.
right. It's not saved. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
I've never used a type O labor pool purchase. I've never used a type M for item purchase. Asset register, if you have the asset or inventory asset register module, which I don't think any other room in here does, that just states that it's a ledger account to be used exclusively with the asset register. Even more confusing to most people is this integration subtype. So when I did that crop sales, it asked me, do I want to harvest it or no? Harvest, yes or no? So that was set to a default of yes, meaning it gave me the option to harvest it or not, but it defaulted to yes to harvest it. But I could choose not to harvest it. So like on a chemical purchase, you have always no means you never apply that chemical to a field when you purchase it. It will never give you the option of picking a field. It will always go into inventory. Always yes means it always gets put to a field when you write the check or AP for it. You have to pick a field or a project for it. It's going to always be a buy and dispense entry. Then you have your defaults, which defaults to going into inventory, but you had the option of applying it to a field. Default to yes is it defaults to going to a field, but you have the option of saying no, I'm just putting it into inventory. I always prefer to set to either number 3 or 4 because it always comes up that maybe like 99% of the time you never put a chemical to a field, but that one time you want to put it to a field, you have to either change the ledger account, integration subtype to do that, or add another ledger account. So I prefer to have the default, so I always have the option on input to pick if I'm putting it to a field or putting it into inventory. So let's go back to the add check. So again, on this corn sales, what I'm talking about, when I get over here after mine, it has harvest yes or no. I have a choice. If I change that ledger account, which I probably need to close this to do. I don't have that open. Okay, I do. I don't want to have my ledger account open and go back and open it again. So I could change it. Go to account 310, change it. Say always no, change it always no. I do need to go back to it to reset it a little bit here, but now it does not give me. See, it skips right over. It is set to a sale only. I do not get an option to harvest at all. There's no right or wrong way to set that up. If you always have a one way and that's the only way you ever want to have it to be, you can always set it to yes or no. Again, my preference though is default because it always happens to me. There's something that's an anomaly and it has to be in a different way. So I set those to defaults. Okay. thing on this ledger account setup screen though can be changed. It doesn't work for you, come and change it. Nothing is set in stone on the ledger account setup. So you can have it set one way, try it out. It's not working for you, come up and set some of these settings a little bit differently, and you'll be good to go. Okay. So I'm going to show how the ledger account, we kind of saw the input. I'm going to show like on a report really quick how some of these ledger accounts look. Okay. So very basic. So here we can see that I talked about the heading accounts. I only had 2 here, income and expense. I could have had some more heading accounts and would have broken up the income section a little bit more here and had different subtotals going down. But these are just, all the reports will list your ledger accounts on the left-hand side with the number and the description. So you can see that you better know what these mean. Like VCO, you better know what VCO means, otherwise that line would mean nothing to you on this report. So your descriptions do need to be short and concise, but make sense to anybody who will be reading a report. This more on the integration subtypes and stuff that I already went over. Okay. So the next level is centers. And I would say ledger accounts and centers are probably the 2 things that you have to think the most about when you're setting up an FBS or looking at how your reports are going to work. Your centers and your ledger accounts are going to have the most effect on your reporting and your entry. So centers are a level that you want to be able to track a profit and loss to. Again, we have 6 characters to work with. They can be alpha or numeric. And you do want to, again, group them for reporting purposes. So I do use alpha characters quite frequently in my centers. So I use them for the grouping purposes. So like loans, I might start with the letters LN. So I have LN and then numbering, again, leaving room to add in between your different centers that as you get new loans or employees or anything like that. So I might put an L and an N before my loans and put them together. So I can always just type in LN and get to my loan centers. Employees, I usually start with the EM and then number, so all my employees are together. You do want, the reason we have employees suggested as centers is so you can track individual withholdings and benefits to those employees. If you have crops, I like to start my corn, like the corn beans, be CN, then 19 maybe, or CN and 0019 to get all the digits in there. Soybeans would be SB, sometimes, and then 4 digits 0019 for the year. Then your marketing centers would have an M in them somewhere for your marketing centers for your crops. Equipment, I always start with EQs, but I further always group mine. I have EQ and I might have all of like my vehicles like trucks or company cars together, and then I'd have my bigger power units like all my tractors. So EQ 1000 might be vehicles, EQ 2000 might be power units, EQ 3000 might be implements, EQ 4000 might be my semis and trailers. So I group them as to type of equipment they are, again for reporting purposes later on. Overhead centers and facility centers for livestock are usually mostly letters. So I might have like, and overhead's also used for crops, I guess. So my OH, corn, OH, beans, OH, sows, OH, finishers, and FIN for finishers, and I kind of abbreviate that, but I usually use a lot of letters for my overhead centers. And in facility centers, I always start with FAC for me. Buildings, usually I use BLD, but you want buildings and locations to have centers because you have repairs and usually taxes, property taxes to buildings and locations. So that's stuff I want to track on. You might have loans to buildings. So you want to have those as centers as well. We do have 6 types of centers, and these are used, some of them are used for the additional modules. So obviously crops, breeding, feeding, and group feeding are for your those additional modules. But the types of center you set up allows for pooling of monies and allocating of monies. So we have service centers that are S centers, and they can be allocated to other centers. So what this would be, a service center would be an employee, a service center would be equipment. So you're tracking expenses and income to those individual employees and equipment, but I can then allocate that employee to different overhead centers, like 50% to my crop overhead, 50% to my livestock overhead center. So I accumulate all the costs, and then I put them out to my production centers.
Are those,
You're
are
good.
those designated as that, can all centers be allocated to other centers, or do you have to, is the service center a particular type in the software that you set up separately?
An S center would be one that's like the bottom level of your allocating tree.
Well, I just wondered if in the software you have, is S just your designation and all centers are treated the same, and then you can, what I'm asking is, I think, is that S just your designation and then how you handle it, or is that actually in the software, those are the S's are the only ones that can actually be allocated to other centers?
S and N centers can both be allocated to other centers.
S and N?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So here's a center setup, and we have the options of S and N. Yeah, because you wouldn't have, your other options are crop production. Those can't be allocated to a different center. Okay. Crop marketing, again, doesn't get allocated anywhere. Breeding and feeding don't get allocated anywhere.
Okay.
The difference between our F and G centers is F centers don't require groups. They're not going to ask you for a group designation. Anything that goes there is not going to go to a specific group, where if you have a G center, it's going to require you to pick a group for anything that you put to that G center. So your sows probably aren't going to be a group center. They'll just be a feeding center. Anything finishing nursery will be a group feeding center. Anything continual flow will be a F center as well. Has the same check mark box up here, active or inactive. Active, inactive. Again, active means you can put entries into it. If it's inactive, you can still report on it, but you can't put new entries to it. We talked about the numbering and using letters and numbers on that, and just, again, leaving enough room for editing. Again, you can edit your center numbers at any time you want. There are internal IDs, again, that save your history, so you can change center numbers as necessary. And description is up to you. An inactive date here only works on, which ones is it? Is it turn inactive? I think it's crop centers and inactive date here. Which means that you could leave it active, but put an inactive date in here, and then you couldn't put any data in that center after that. Just a way to keep it on the active list, but have a date there. This map to center is for something that it's S1, S2 centering that I don't think anybody here does. Daryl Ellis was in all of this. If I've never used it, Daryl, that was for Daryl's purposes, if you met Daryl yesterday. If you do pick a crop production, you will come down here in this bottom left-hand corner and fill in what your units are. Is it bales? Is it bushels? Is it tons? Depending on if it's hay or a grain. Weight unit, corn 56 pounds per bushel, whatever, it might be 2,000 pounds per ton, whatever you have there. You have your ideal moisture, your commodity, and your crop year. If you picked a livestock center, any of the feeding, breeding, or group feeding, you can come over here. It will ask if there's any crop operations, yes or no. What do you want to be your unit value? Is it pounds, kilograms, hundredweight, or head? What stage of growth? And this is very important. Stage of growth is very important if you're running our Eclipse modules with your smart feeder or smart breeder, because of sideways movements. You have to have your centers appropriately marked the stage of growth to allow for correct movement of funds from stage 1, stage 2, finishing stage. And then we do have some dairy stages down here as well, and some steer heifer stuff for your cattle. If you're having a breeding center, it does ask for gestation periods, number of crates, and then animal capacity works for your any feeding center. You get to have that animal capacity to do some budgeting purposes there. So these are just a generic ones that we have set up in here, and you can see this is ones I've played with a little bit and worked with. But again, I do recommend trying to use all 6 characters in your numbering system here, just to make it a little easier for reporting and stuff like that. So,
I have another question.
Yeah.
I actually have 2. One's gonna stupid, so I'll do the stupid one first. If you have a crop that has like grain and straw, you have those units there. Is there a way? Is that a separate crop?
it's a separate crop.
So the straw would be a separate crop.
Mhm.
Okay. And then, as far as the overall incentives, if you're trying to structure based on farm financial standards approach, do you guys have anything to help get that with that, as far as?
I have not found anything. Doug, do you have any?
Well, we have the Farm Financial Standards ledger account recommendations.
Yeah, but not centers. I know you asked that a lot before, and I asked Norm about, who had that last, Walt was his name? I can't think of who had
But
that.
to be honest, it's still pretty wide open on the standard. You use their ledger accounts and what they recommend. We do have that case study, Brian. I don't know if you've seen that. There's the Farm Financial Standards Managerial Accounting Case Study. I can email that to you. It's a PDF format.
Well, I guess the one that struck me the most was, and this is probably his own, was the guy that was here from last year from Idaho Goodman.
Yeah.
Dick Whitman. You know, he had pretty much a template for the structure. And I think it was, of course, it might not be officially farm financial standards, but you probably, I mean, I needed that presentation. Is that still something from last year's, there was a program last year that would be available somewhere, or?
It should have been, but we changed websites and everything was wiped out, and I couldn't find it.
Okay.
I messaged Norm about it, and I hadn't heard back and forgot to
It's
follow up.
supposed to be up on our new website, but we haven't got all the videos and stuff over there yet.
Yeah. So we might
But
run
we
past
should
it.
be able to, we should have it somewhere.
I thought, I emailed Norm because Brian asked about that before, and I let that kind of, I dropped that on my, that's my fault, but I didn't follow through on that. Because I was looking for that for you, but, yeah, I don't know of anything other standardized way to put up centers in my, I was trying to think if there's any.
Yeah, Ron Swanson did the Carl and Clara Cyclone, which was for the Farm Financial Standards.
And,
So,
what's that one over here? Here. These are older ones. This is a Claire and Carl cyclone that Doug was talking about. That has some, again, they're not all 6 digits. Some of them are high. They're 5 digits, 6 digits here. So this is one way you can see, like, so for corn they have PC, corn, production corn, and then the year 2000, bean production. So production soybeans is production P, and then S for soybeans, and then 2 years.
But then the actual production centers are all numeric,
We have those.
farm by year.
So these would, yeah, so these would be overheads over here. And then we have farm by year down here. Not sure of what this 4 digits and then the year ahead of it looks like here on these.
Yeah, and then there's a, in the middle there's a carry for each farm.
So yeah, I'm not as familiar as this one as Doug is. Scrolling through here. Right here they have the whip centers. If you're using Eclipse, they have that, the whip second. Usually all of ours have the little W in front of it for any whip centers that are system generated. Here's what I was talking about equipment. We have some EQ 1000s, EQ 2000s. So we have power units, planting, tillage, growing, harvesting vehicles down at your EQ 9000. Again, like I said, using the EQ and then a number designation for the type of equipment it is.
And then you would have sub in each of those categories.
Yeah, you'd have numbers under between those. Yeah. And the employees EM1, with the zeros, and then EM0001 for the employee name there or something like that.
Yeah.
So this would be some stuff here we have. Kind of see how they utilize those, and then we have the general finance and stuff down there. What really matters when you're setting up these, and I'll use the user-defined report. I don't know if it's not enough. We'll use that. I'm not as familiar with this data set, but we'll see if we can find some data here. So when I was talking about thinking about your ledger account and center ranges for reporting purposes, is right here. We have ledger account range, and you see this box here isn't that full. You could pick 0 in the Z's, if nobody knows, means it's every ledger account, every center, every division. But you can go through here and pick individual ones, but you are limited to what you can see in that box. So I could get 5 ledger accounts there. Whereas if I wanted to say, I want to run for all of my crop income accounts, I could put 3 question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. So it's all my 3, be 32,000 through 36,000. But I don't have to type that out. So one way I could do is my 3 and my question marks. Another way you could do this to range things would be 32. You could pick the first one or type it in. Pick the last one or type it in. Remove the comma in between them and put a hyphen, and that puts a range in there. And then I could do a secondary range here if I want to run all of my 3,000s and then come down, maybe run, I don't know, my 6,000s, my crop expenses. I don't know all crop expenses, but we'll say, we'll just say through. We'll say here, that's my last crop expense. I could do 2 different ranges and get more ledger accounts reported on. So that's where putting your ledger accounts in groupings makes sense. Again, if I wanted to run for certain, like all my employees, I could put in EM and then my question marks and get all my employee centers to come up. That's just a little kind of think about how you're going to ever want to run reports. And that's kind of hard to say when you haven't seen the reports, and it's kind of what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Because you haven't ran the reports, you don't know what the reports look like, so how do you know how to set things up? And that's why I'm trying to give a little guidance of how I've seen people use the reports and how they've set the ledger accounts and centers to best.
And we're happy to help. Existing customers, we can do an audit and look at your setup issues and kind of visit with you and see, where we need. If a new client, definitely, we're going to help you get set up and get going and maybe look at your existing chart of accounts, and then here's how we might number them. Does that look all right to you? That type of stuff. So we work through the process with you.
Yeah. Usually if you are a new client, I say, send me what you're using right now. In Excel format, I will make notes, tell you how I'd rearrange it. You can choose to keep those changes or not go with those changes. And then usually We then decide, I just go ahead and import those into your data set for you, so you aren't typing these all in and filling all this stuff out for your setup. It imports them really cleanly and quickly, so we get your you up and going quicker. The last two setups, I'm going to rush through them a little bit just because we've got a little set behind them. They're not as critical as the first two we talked about, is your division setup and your vendors. So divisions just means that within a company, you might have separate entities that are not separate taxable entities. So you might have trucking, but it's not a separate company. It doesn't have its own, federal ID number, but you want to be able to track trucking as a separate portion of your operation. Maybe you have crops and livestock and you want to separate those out into divisions so you can run reports on just your crop ongoings without livestock, but again, the crop part of it isn't a separate taxable ID, so it's a division within your company. You set them up, just give them a number and a description. You can have different fiscal months for each one, but I don't think you would ever have that happen very often. If they're not separate taxable, they shouldn't have separate fiscal months. But there is that option there. And then all the reports, all the accounting reports do let you report on divisions. And then the last setup is just your vendors. And you don't have to have vendors on your vendor list, it just makes it more helpful. You can hand type in every vendor without having a vendor list, but if you have a vendor list, you start typing it in, it fills in the rest of the name for you, pick it on a pick list. If you're gonna run, and you wanna be able to run 1099s for your employees or contract workers, you need to have a vendor set up for them and have them flagged as a 1099 vendor. So let's see if we can find something here. So vendors, they do have sort keys, and that's just if you use a sort key, it's just if you start typing in, it will sort by that instead of by the name. Personally, some people really do use the sort key. I don't usually run across very many using the sort key function at all, so I usually would just go by name. We do have active and inactive, just like everything else. Sort key, your name goes here. The contact, if you had a contact number or a secondary, care of, you could go here in the contact name. If you have address, 2 lines of address, city, state, zip, country or account, social security number, federal ID number, cell phone, fax, email. None of these fields down here you can't do anything with it. You can't send an email through the program, you can't call them through the program, but it's a way to keep all your contact information here and easily accessible. But we do have these report flags, which means if you're running our accounts payable or receivable module, it does require your vendor to be in the vendor list to use the AP or AR, and you have to have it flagged as an AP or AR vendor, and that's just for reporting purposes through those modules and paying the payables or receiving the receivables. If you have set as a credit card vendor, that means you can put accounts payable in or accounts receivable in for a credit card vendor, and it's going to ask you then it's going to have a secondary field for a second vendor. So you make a purchase with your city bank card. You can then say, well, the second vendor's going to ask where you actually spent that money. You put Walmart in, or you put Farm and Fleet, or whoever you actually made the charge to for that kind of purposes, and then. That way you can see who you actually spent the money to, but you can run a statement and reconcile your credit card statement using the credit card vendor. And then here, if it's a 1099 vendor, you check mark this box. If this box is not checked on a vendor, then it won't come up on our 1099 report. That being said, you can be paying that employee all year long or that person all year long, and then at the end of the year come check the 1099 box, and then you'll be able to report on that person. If you do have it set as an AP or AR, you can use these boxes over here. Early pay discount is just a recording, just say what it is. It doesn't actually calculate your early pay discount. What does calculate is the days till due and the last day for invoice. Those will calculate automatically, put in your due dates based on the numbers you put in here. So if it's always due 5 days after the invoice date, you put a 5 in here. If it's always due on the 5th of the month, it's a -5. Then The last,
You can override the due date as you're entering.
You can.
Payable too.
you can. Okay, and then same with AR, you can put in days till due and stuff like that, and it automatically populates the due date. So when I say that, here is what I mean when I say you don't have to have everybody in your vendor list, and you can add them as you go as well. So here are a list of my vendors, so I can start typing in C, and then it goes down to Claude, and I click that, enter, and it puts it in. I can also choose not, and I can put in my name. Guys, I'm not on the vendor list. Put it in, and you type to me. And always add vendors, again, on the fly from any entry screen down here on the bottom. Any questions about divisions or vendors?
Now, can I ask, when you print 1099s, I'm assuming, do you guys supply the 1099s, or we get 1099s just off the line, or how does it work? That I'm assuming it's pretty easy. It's kind of hit
Yeah,
a
we
button
have-
and print your 1099s. That's what we do now, basically.
We have two different ways you can do your 1099s. One is you have to have the pre-printed forms. You put them in your printer, and it prints on the pre-printed form.
Yeah.
You have to add some blank lines depending on your printer to get it lined up. Not real great, but it works. We do have e-filing as well. We have a third party we use called Nelco. There is an option when you run your 1099 report to send it to Nelco. There is a small charge on Nelco's side for that, but it sends everything there. I think it starts out like $4 per 1099. It goes down depending on how many 1099s you do.
Yeah.
Clear down to, I think, less than $1 per 1099. What that does is you have the option to mail them their 1099, to email them their 1099, to electronically file the 1099s. You can always go in and edit the 1099s anytime you need to edit them as well, and does all some other stuff there on that Nelco website. And that's probably where most of our users have moved to if they're going to use our software for the 1099s, is to going through that Nelco third-party vendor. Yeah.
I might have missed it on the AR. Is there an interest rate?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
We do not calculate any interest. You can say what your interest rate is on that vendor setup, but it won't calculate it for you. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the type of entries and when you would use them and how you would use them. And the other room is the Eclipse, which is our managerial accounting section, if anybody wants to go over there.